It's a great pleasure to be here, not least because before all that working in politics, I spent 15 years working as a news reporter and a lot of that as a regional reporter. So, traditionally at these sorts of functions you find a connection with the audience, and my farming credentials are a little tenuous. My mother grew up in Lake Ageligo, so that meant I had some time on the farm, but I do feel some shared experience from the writing perspective with some of you in the room, and it's great to be here. Look, today I want to go behind the headlines and look at what the data's telling us about the state of the food and grocery processing sector in Australia, in particular its importance in regional Australia, at the way consumer preference, often increasingly enabled by technology, is driving change back through the whole food value chain, right back to the farm, and the critical importance for farmers and processors alike to be attuned to that change if we're to capture more of the value-adding benefit of what's become called the dining boom. That dramatic escalation in food demand from the rising middle classes in our trading partners to the north. And along the way, I'll cover some of the hot topics in the food and agribusiness space at the moment. Things like country of origin labelling, foreign investment, regulatory reform, retailer relations, trade. This is an issues-rich environment, and I think that's because we all eat and we all shop, and so we all have a personal stake in the food and grocery sector. For most Australians, I suspect it's something they take for granted. The wide range of safe, quality, affordable food is available any hour of the day or night just up the road at the local convenience store or supermarket. But I think most of you, like me, are interested in how the food and agribusiness sector helps answer what I think is the great economic policy challenge facing the nation, which is simply how we transition out of the mining investment boom without ending up in recession. And that debate about rebalancing the economy, the focus on and the concern about where the jobs and growth are going to come from in the future makes that challenge very relevant to our sector. Food and agriculture, of course, has been a mainstay of the Australian economy for 2 centuries, and I certainly am of the view that it will be just as important in the future as it's been in the past. And look, we are at the start of a new food boom, and we shouldn't be thinking about this as a commodity boom in our view, because food fundamentally is different. It's a value-added product, and the opportunity to capture more of that value add in Australia translates to jobs and investment, often in regional Australia, rather than simply seeing it as a commodity trade, although the commodity element of it is clearly important. I think to understand the great potential for the food and grocery sector to pick up the economic slack and drive growth and jobs and prosperity for the future, we do need to think about the whole food value chain, from farm to fork, paddock to plate, conception to consumption. And moving up that value chain, we think, is critical by getting more competitive, more attuned to consumer preference through innovation and new technologies, and also by focusing on the markets where our premium product is most highly valued. Now, look, obviously the Food and Grocery Council, the organisation I head, works on behalf of companies that are food and grocery processors. So that's in between the farm gate and retail, not the retailers, not the farmers, but anyone in between. And that's a broad scope. This is about transforming the quality produce from the farm into the food and consumer goods that every consumer eats or uses every day. We eat bread, not wheat, steak, not steers, we drink pasteurised milk. Most of what we eat goes through some level of processing or packaging, from flour and milk right through to chocolates and highly processed foods like confectionery. That value adding makes the sector a significant chunk of the national economy. We produce a State of the Industry report each year. We put it out a few weeks ago, prepared by EY. And it showed industry turnover of $119 billion and growing, direct employment of 322,000 Australians, and more than 40% of those are in regional Australia. Exports of $30 billion, that's growing strongly, and productivity rising. And it's a sector that spans the big global FMCG brands right through to often quite small family-owned Australian firms, and a lot of those brands that are synonymous with Australia, Vegemite, Milo, SPC, Birdseye, to name a few. It's a trade-exposed, highly competitive, dynamic part of the economy that touches every consumer every day. And the linkages into rural and regional Australia are critical. Food and grocery companies live or die by their ability to understand consumers and respond quickly to changing consumer preference and expectations. Consumer preference is vital to the future of, and responding to consumer preference is vital to the importance of the future of food and agri. And I just want to illustrate that with by way of example with two quite prominent business stories that occurred on the same day a few weeks ago, on the 29th of October. The first one was, it was the day that Woolworths announced a significant profit downgrade and an acceleration of its investment into cutting shelf prices in order to turn around perceptions that it's more expensive than Coles and Aldi. Its shares tanked. They dropped 10% on the day to a new low for the year. And on the same day, Blackmores, which is a vitamin company, announced a deal with Bega, a dairy processor, that will get Blackmores into the infant formula business. And its shares spiked 20%, cracked the $200 level on that day. Shares that were $40 or so last year. Dramatically different stories on the same day, and it struck me on the day that here's a great illustration of the power of consumer preference, or more precisely, the differing preferences by differing groups of consumers. And by consumer preference, I'm talking here not about preference measured by attitude surveys or market research, but preference as revealed by actual purchasing decisions. What are consumers willing to spend their hard-earned cash on? On the one hand, Woolworths, Australia, as we all know, Woolworths, biggest food and grocery retailer, around 40% of the supermarket retail share. Big and successful business. Some of the highest profit margins of any retailer in the world. But Australian consumers are increasingly value conscious. They're worried about economic security. They're worried about cost of living. And despite 5 years of retail price deflation that everyone in the food business has felt, consumers continue to feel that the cost of living keeps going up, and they believe Aldi and Coles are cheaper than Woolworths, and that's a big challenge for Woolworths to turn around. That's why they're investing around $600 million this year into lowering shelf prices, which has cut their profit margin from 8% to about 6%. Now, these same consumers, are concerned about the viability of farmers, and they do think that Australian sourcing is important. But we need to be realistic, because they'll buy the $1 milk and they'll buy an imported product if it's cheaper. They're consumers with high expectations around food safety and quality and sourcing, but even higher sensitivity to price. Blackmores, on the other hand, well, they've ridden a wave of growth based on demand for their vitamins out of middle-class consumers in China. Consumers who are willing to pay a hefty premium for imported product, and obviously by broadening into infant formula, they're seeking to extend that. They're not alone. Another Australian vitamin maker, Swiss, was recently sold to a Hong Kong firm for $1.7 billion off the back of surging sales into China. Infant formula makers, Bellamy's and A2, we've all seen their products stripped from supermarket shelves to be resold online in China at several times the Australian retail price. You've now got Australian branded fresh milk on the shelf in China for $9 or $10 a litre. So that there are enough consumers in China willing to pay 4 or 5 or 10 times the retail price that an Australian consumer would pay for vitamins and infant formula or fresh milk to be having a real impact on these Australian firms. And that's because they don't take food quality or safety or sourcing for granted. In buying something that is certified as an Australian sourced product, they're effectively buying a bit of that clean air and clean water and clean green grass that fed the cow that produced the milk and so on. And they're willing to pay more for it, for the peace of mind of a reliable, safe processing system and clean and green agricultural produce. So it begs the question: which market do we want to be in, or more realistically, where do we want to put the weight when it comes to securing growth and better returns for both farmers and processors? On the domestic front, our view is that conditions are likely to remain challenging. You've got a pretty intense competition at the retail level between Woolworths, Coles, Aldi and Metcash, which means little or no ability for food producers to pass through higher costs or gain price increases. It's already caused a big shift in profit from suppliers generally to retailers as they've used their size and market power. Add to that, population growth is slowing. Wages growth is the lowest on record. And I think what that means for farmers and food processors looking to improve returns is that Australian consumers are only likely to pay more if they get more. A premium offer, convenience, a narrative around provenance or health and well-being, for example, and understanding that preference in order to make more in the domestic market, an understanding of that preference and what they're willing to pay for is vital. And there's some examples of that. I think the great one is the rebound of SPC off the back of telling that story, shouting out that story about provenance and the connection to the farm. But the major growth opportunities we think are going to be offshore, and companies that have been able to improve their competitiveness in order to maintain a presence in export markets while the dollar was at $1.10 US are now seeing the benefits of that. The standout story in our State of the Industry report that came out a few weeks ago was quite astonishing. 28% lift in processed food and beverage exports. 28% in a year, from 20 billion to 26 billion. These are pretty big numbers. The trade surplus in processed food and beverage items jumped 80%, from 6 billion to 10 billion. The export growth was broadly based, and obviously the falling dollar is now a powerful tailwind for those food and grocery manufacturers who've established an export market. More interesting for me is that among our membership, even the companies that have been focused solely on the domestic market are now looking at those export opportunities. This has, I think, been a significant shift in the 3 years I've been in this job. We've yet to see the full benefit of the recent free trade agreements, which we think are incredibly important, transformative. But of course those tariff reductions occur over a period of time, and so we've yet to see them flow through. And we've only got to look across the Tasman at the power of those agreements. New Zealand dairy exports up 1,000% or tenfold over the last 8 years. As incomes rise in emerging economies, dietary choices broaden. And in China by 2030, more than half the population will have an income between 10,000 US and 40,000 US. If you look at the infant formula market, in China at present there are more than 20 million babies born each year. That figure is expected to rise with the scrapping of the one-child policy. Global retail analyst IGD forecasted in the next 5 years, China will see 35% growth in its food and grocery market to $1.5 trillion US. India a 79% increase and Indonesia a 63% increase. Indonesia is quite interesting. ABARES put out a report a couple of weeks ago on food demand in Indonesia, predicting that by 2050 food demand in Indonesia would double, but imports of food would rise 20-fold. Again, reflecting that broadening dietary choice. And I think all this data reinforces the scale of the export opportunity for Australian farmers and food processors. None of it's guaranteed. We are a high-cost economy and a relatively small producer when you look at the scale of demand in these markets. And our best chance of success is in premium, high-value products, not in attempting to be the food bowl for the broader region.